The rumble of Harley-Davidson engines echoed through the dimly lit Oakland clubhouse as members of the Hells Angels gathered for their monthly meeting. The smell of motor oil, leather, and last night's beer hung in the air. Mike Steele Harrison, the chapter president, a burly man with gray streaks in his beard and arms covered in faded tattoos, stood at the front of the room waiting for the chatter to die down. "Listen up," Steele called out, his voice cutting through the noise. The room gradually fell silent. 30 pairs of eyes fixed on him, a sea of weathered faces and leather vests emblazoned with their infamous winged skull patches. Steele cleared his throat. "I got something different on the agenda tonight." He paused, scanning the room. "My niece Lily, she's 8 now. She's back in the hospital." His voice wavered slightly, an unusual crack in his typically stone-cold demeanor. The mood in the room shifted. Many of the members knew about Steele's niece and her battle with leukemia. Some had even visited her, bringing stuffed animals that looked comically small in their massive, calloused hands. "The docs are trying a new treatment," Steele continued, "but the bills are crushing my sister's family. And there are dozens of kids just like Lily in that ward." He leaned forward, placing his hands on the table. "So I've been thinking, we do these rides all the time. What if we made one count for something more?" Bobby Wildman Cooper, the club's vice president with a wild mane of red hair and a beard to match, raised an eyebrow. "What are you getting at, Steele?" "A charity run. For the kids' cancer ward at Oakland Children's," Steele replied, straightening up. 200 miles up the coast, stopping in towns along the way for donations. The room erupted in a mixture of reactions. Some members nodded in approval while others exchanged skeptical glances. "Since when are we a bunch of do-gooders?" called out Tank, a younger member with more bravado than sense. "We're Hell's Angels, not the Salvation Army." Steele fixed his gaze on Tank. "Since my niece started losing her hair for the second time, that's when." The room fell silent again. "Besides," he continued, "when was the last time we did something that didn't end with the cops on our tail? Might be nice to see some different flashing lights for a change." That drew a few chuckles from the older members. Donnie "Doc" Wilson, who despite his nickname had never been near medical school but could patch up a bullet wound, better than most emergency rooms, spoke up. "I'm in. My cousin's kid beat cancer last year. Those doctors work miracles, but they need equipment and that stuff ain't cheap." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Steele nodded, a smile tugging at his lips beneath his bushy mustache. "But let's be real," Wildman interjected, running a hand through his fiery beard. "Who's gonna hand over cash to a bunch of Hell's Angels? Most folks see us coming and lock their doors." It was a fair point. The club's reputation preceded them wherever they went. Decades of headline-making incidents had cemented their image in the public consciousness, and not in a way that inspired charitable giving. Steele had anticipated this. He reached under the table and pulled out a cardboard box, placing it in front of him. "That's why we're going to do this right." He opened the box and pulled out a mock-up of a flyer. "Professional advertising. Press releases. We get the local news involved, maybe that pretty reporter who did the piece on veteran bikers last Memorial Day." He passed the flyer around. It showed a design for a t-shirt with the Hells Angels logo alongside the Children's Hospital emblem, with the words, "Riding for Kids," arched above. "We get sponsors. Local businesses. They put their logos on the shirts, we hand out their coupons or whatever along the route. Everybody wins." Steele was getting animated now, his hands gesturing as he spoke. "And we get the hospital to vouch for us. Make it official." Frank "Quiet Pete" Johnson, who rarely spoke, but when he did, everyone listened, finally raised his hand. Despite approaching 60, his arms were still corded with muscle, and his leathery face told stories of 1,000 rides through sun and rain. "My grandson," he said, his voice like gravel. "He's about the age of your Lily. Healthy, thank God. But I look at him and think, it could be any kid. Could be any of our families." He looked around the room. "We've done enough damage in our time. Maybe it's time to balance the scales a bit." The words hung in the air. Coming from Quiet Pete, they carried weight. Steele nodded gratefully. "So we're doing this?" "A proper charity run?" Hands began to raise around the room, slowly at first, then with growing confidence. Even Tank eventually lifted his hand, though he tried to make it look casual. "All right then," Steele said, a genuine smile breaking across his face. "Let's figure out the details." Over the next few weeks, the Oakland chapter transformed their clubhouse into an unlikely campaign headquarters. Maps were spread across tables usually reserved for poker games, marking out the coastal route with potential stops. The club's ancient printer worked overtime, producing flyers and sponsor packets. The most surprising transformation, however, was in the members themselves. Men who typically spent their free time drinking, fighting, or tuning their bikes were now making phone calls to businesses, negotiating with local radio stations, and designing donation boxes that could be securely attached to their motorcycles. Not everything went smoothly. The first meeting with hospital administrators was tense, with the staff clearly nervous about associating their institution with the infamous motorcycle club. Steele and Wildman had shown up in their cleanest jeans and button-up shirts rather than their usual leathers, but the hospital's director still eyed them warily. "I understand your organization wants to help," the director said, adjusting her glasses, "but you have to understand our concerns about image." Steele leaned forward in his chair, which looked comically small beneath his frame. "Ma'am, I respect that, but my niece Lily is in your oncology ward right now. I've spent more time in your waiting rooms than I have at some of our club meetings lately. This isn't about image for us, it's personal." The director's expression softened slightly. "Lily Harrison? Dr. Chen's patient?" Steele nodded. "She's a fighter, that one," the director said with a small smile. "Always has a new joke for the nurses." "Gets that from her uncle," Wildman quipped. And for the first time, the tension in the room eased. By the end of the meeting, they had tentative approval, contingent on a detailed plan and some ground rules about behavior during the fundraiser. As word spread about the charity run, reactions in the community were mixed. Some local news outlets ran supportive pieces, featuring quotes from the hospital about the critical need for pediatric cancer funding. Others took a more sensationalist angle. Hell's Angels reformed or running a scam. Steele tried not to let the negative coverage bother him, but it was hard. One evening, as he was leaving the hospital after visiting Lily, he found himself walking alongside one of the oncology nurses, a kind-eyed woman named Rita, who had been caring for his niece since her first diagnosis. "I saw the flyers for your fundraiser," Rita said as they waited for the elevator. "It's a wonderful thing you're doing." Steele shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just trying to help the kids." "You know," Rita continued, "some of the other staff were talking. There were concerns." The elevator arrived and they stepped inside. "But I told them about how you sit with Lily for hours even when she's sleeping. How you learn to play that unicorn card game she loves even though you complain about it being girly stuff." She smiled. "That's the real Hell's Angel they should be writing about in the papers." Steele felt a lump form in his throat. He gave a gruff nod, not trusting himself to speak. As the day of the charity run approached, unexpected support began to materialize. A local print shop offered to produce the t-shirts at cost. A radio DJ whose brother had survived childhood cancer promised to broadcast updates throughout the ride. Even a few local police departments along the route reached out, offering escorts through their towns rather than the usual harassment the club typically experienced. The night before the big ride, Steele made one final visit to the hospital. Lily was having a good day, sitting up in bed and coloring a picture. Her head was wrapped in a bright purple scarf, a gift from one of the female associates of the club. "Uncle Mike," she called out when she saw him, using his real name rather than his road name. "Did you bring me a present?" Steele laughed. "Always thinking about the loot, aren't you, Squirt?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small stuffed angel with black wings, custom made. "Thought it was fitting." Lily grabbed it, examining the tiny leather jacket someone had painstakingly sewn onto the toy. "It's perfect. I'm naming him Steely after you." Steele felt that familiar tightness in his chest that only his niece could cause. "Big day tomorrow. We're riding for you and all your friends here." Lily's smile faltered slightly. "Mom says some people are saying mean things. That you guys aren't really going to give the money to the hospital?" Steele's jaw tightened. He sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb any of the tubes connected to his niece. "Listen, Lilypad. There's always going to be people who think the worst of folks like us. Can't blame them, really, given some of the trouble we've caused." He took her small hand in his. "But you don't know everything about us. Don't know what we're capable of when we care about something or someone." Lily's smile returned. "You're going to raise $1 million. And then Dr. Chen can build a machine that zaps all the cancer away forever. Steele chuckled. Well, I don't know about 1,000,000. But we're gonna do our best. He stood up, ruffling her scarf gently. Now get some rest. I'll come see you as soon as we get back. As he left the hospital and walked to his bike, Steele felt a strange mixture of emotions. Tomorrow, 35 Hell's Angels would thunder down the coastal highway, not running from the law or looking for trouble, but riding with purpose, with heart. For kids like Lily, the weather forecast mentioned possible rain, but Steele wasn't worried. They'd ridden through worse. Nothing was going to stop this charity run. The Angels were on a mission, and heaven help anyone who got in their way. Dawn broke with a gray, sullen light over the Oakland clubhouse. Steele had been up for hours, checking weather reports on his phone with increasing concern. The forecast that had predicted possible showers 2 days ago had transformed overnight into severe weather warning, heavy rainfall expected. He stepped outside, coffee in hand, and looked up at the sky. Dark clouds rolled in from the coast, bringing with them a chilly wind that carried the scent of rain. Steele took a long sip from his mug, the hot liquid doing little to warm the cold knot of worry in his stomach. His phone buzzed. It was Wildman. You seen the morning news? Wildman asked without preamble. Been kinda busy checking if we're gonna need to build an ark, Steele replied. Why? Wildman's sigh crackled through the speaker. Channel 7 did a piece about our charity run. Let's just say they weren't exactly singing our praises. Steele cursed under his breath. How bad? They interviewed some cop who dealt with us back in '08. Brought up every bar fight and rumble from the last decade. Then they had some child psychology expert questioning whether violent biker gangs should be associated with children's causes. Wildman's voice was tight with anger. They're making it sound like we're using sick kids as a PR stunt. Steele pinched the bridge of his nose, feeling a headache forming. Anything else I should know before the guys show up? There was a pause. Coastal Brewery pulled their sponsorship. Got a call from their marketing guy at 6 a.m. Said they couldn't risk the association after seeing the news. That was a blow. Coastal had been their biggest sponsor, promising to match donations up to $5,000. Who else bailed? Steele asked, knowing there would be more. Tony's auto shop and that big real estate company. But the coffee shop and most of the mom-and-pop stores are still with us. Wildman's voice softened slightly. And the hospital called to confirm they're still on board. Said they've been getting calls all morning from parents of patients who support what we're doing. Steele felt a small surge of relief. At least there's that. See you in an hour. By 8 a.m., the clubhouse parking lot was filled with motorcycles and the nervous energy of 36 Hell's Angels. Many were checking their bikes one final time, securing the custom-made donation boxes that had been attached to the back of each motorcycle. Others huddled in small groups, shooting glances at the darkening sky. Doc approached Steele, holding out his phone. Weather radar looks like we've got about a 2-hour window before the worst of it hits. If we push hard, we might make it to Half Moon Bay before the real downpour. Steele nodded, tucking the information away. Let's hope. A small convoy of cars arrived. Family members and supporters who would be following the ride in vehicles, carrying spare parts, first aid supplies, and extra rain gear. Among them was Rita, the oncology nurse from the hospital, who had taken a rare day off to join the support team. Quite the turnout, she said, walking up to Steele. She was dressed in jeans and a sweatshirt with the hospital logo, her nurse's pragmatism evident in the waterproof jacket tied around her waist despite the still dry skies. Even with the weather and the bad press? Steele asked. Rita smiled. Maybe because of it. Nothing brings people together like something to prove. She handed him a plastic bag. From the kids in the ward. They made these last night. Inside were dozens of colorful paper angels, each decorated by a child in the cancer ward. Messages of thanks and encouragement were scrawled in crayon and marker across the wings. Steele pulled one out that had "Go Uncle Mike," written in purple with a drawing that might have been either a motorcycle or a horse. Lily's artwork was still a work in progress. Thought your guys could each carry one, Rita explained. A reminder of who you're writing for. Steele swallowed hard. Thanks, this is really something. By 8:30, with the paper angels distributed and tucked safely inside leather jackets, Steele called everyone together for a final briefing. The mood had grown more determined despite the setbacks, or perhaps because of them. These were men accustomed to adversity, to being counted out and written off. It only made them more resolute. "Weather's not on our side today," Steele announced, raising his voice to be heard over the distant rumble of thunder. "And neither are some folks who think they know what we're about. But here's what I know." He looked around at the circle of faces. "I know that every one of you showed up today. I know that there are kids in that hospital right now who believe in us. And I know that Hell's Angels don't turn back because of a little rain or a few nasty headlines." A chorus of agreement rose from the group. "We've got 200 miles of road ahead of us," Steele continued. "We stick to the plan. First stop is San Mateo, then Half Moon Bay, Santa Cruz, and up through the coastal towns. Support vehicles will meet us at each stop. Any problems on the road, we handle it the way we always do, together." Quiet Pete, who had been silently listening, suddenly spoke up. "Been riding with this club for 37 years. Done some things I'm proud of, plenty I'm not. But today?" He looked around, his weathered face solemn. "Today's a day our grandkids can be proud of, so let's ride like we mean it." With a roar that seemed to challenge the gathering storm itself, 35 motorcycles came to life. The vibration thrummed through the asphalt, a physical manifestation of their collective purpose. Steele took his position at the front with Wildman and Doc flanking him. They pulled out of the lot in formation, a long line of chrome and leather flowing like a river of determination. The first drops of rain began to fall as they hit the highway, but no one seemed to notice. Their route took them along the coast, a winding ribbon of asphalt with the Pacific Ocean on one side and rolling hills on the other. In better weather, it would have been a beautiful ride. Today, with the rain coming in sideways and visibility decreasing by the mile, it was an exercise in endurance. Yet there was something powerful about the image they presented. 35 bikers in formation, their black leather glistening with rain, donation boxes proudly displayed, cutting through the storm like they were bulletproof. Passing cars honked in support. People waved from windows, and at one point a group of hospital workers stood under umbrellas on an overpass, holding a banner that read, "Thank you for riding for our kids." Their first stop was in San Mateo, where the local coffee shop that had sponsored them had set up a donation station in their parking lot. Despite the weather, or perhaps because of the attention the rain-soaked bikers generated, a small crowd had gathered. People stepped forward to drop money into the collection boxes, some sharing stories of their own experiences with childhood illness. A local reporter approached Steele as he was wringing water from his beard. Unlike the morning news piece, she seemed genuinely interested in their cause. "What made the Hells Angels decide to support pediatric cancer research?" she asked, holding a microphone while her cameraman filmed the scene. Steele thought about the rehearsed answer he had prepared for press questions. Instead, he reached inside his jacket and carefully pulled out Lily's slightly damp paper angel. "My niece made this," he said simply. "She's 8, fighting leukemia for the second time. There are dozens of kids like her in that hospital. They're the real warriors, not us. We're just the guys with the motorcycles who decided to do something useful for a change." The authenticity of his answer seemed to catch the reporter off guard. She asked a few more questions, and several other writers shared their own connections to the cause. Children, nieces, nephews, friends' kids who had battled cancer. By the time they left San Mateo, the rain was coming down in earnest, reducing visibility to a few hundred feet. The support vehicle's hazard lights created a blurry orange trail for the bikers to follow. "Should we wait it out?" Wildman shouted to Steele over the storm as they prepared to get back on the road. Steele looked at the sky, then at his watch. They were already behind schedule due to the weather, and the Children's Hospital was expecting them for a big check presentation at the end of the day. "We push on to Half Moon Bay," he decided. "Reassess there." The ride to Half Moon Bay was treacherous. The coastal highway became slick with rain, and strong gusts of wind threatened to push the riders off course. They maintained formation but tightened the gaps between bikes, creating a more compact, safer group. Two of the older riders struggling with the conditions moved to the support vehicles, their bikes secured in trailer hitches. Despite the challenges, there was something almost meditative about riding through the storm. The focus required to stay upright and on course didn't allow for distraction or doubt. Every rider was completely present in the moment, their usual troubles temporarily washed away by the more immediate concerns of road, rain, and purpose. When they finally pulled into Half Moon Bay, soaked to the skin but intact, they were greeted by an unexpected sight. The small coastal town, which had initially been hesitant to approve their donation stop, had transformed its main street into a welcome zone. Tents had been set up to provide shelter, and volunteers handed out hot drinks. A hastily made sign declared Half Moon Bay supports cancer fighters on motorcycles or in hospital beds. What happened? Steele asked the town's mayor, a practical-looking woman in her 60s who was personally distributing towels to the drenched riders. "We saw the morning news," she explained. "That hatchet job they did on you all. Then we got a call from the children's hospital about what you're really doing." She handed Steele a steaming cup of coffee. "My grandson was treated there last year. Whole town pulled together for our family. Figured we could do the same for you." As the Hells Angels gathered under the tents, checking their bikes and warming up, Steele felt something he hadn't expected. Hope. Maybe the skeptics and the storm clouds didn't matter as much as he'd feared. Maybe what counted was showing up, pushing forward, believing that a group of rough men on motorcycles could do something good in the world. The rain continued to fall, and the weather radar showed worse conditions ahead. But as Steele looked around at his rain-soaked brothers, at the townspeople who had come out to support them, at the donation boxes that were steadily filling despite everything, he felt a strange certainty they would make it. No matter what came next, the unexpected warmth of Half Moon Bay had lifted their spirits. But as the Hells Angels pulled back onto the coastal highway, the weather showed no signs of improvement. If anything, the rain fell harder, drumming against their helmets and reducing visibility to mere yards. Steele led the pack with grim determination, his hands stiff with cold despite his heavy gloves. They had decided to push through to Santa Cruz, bypassing some of the smaller planned stops to make up time. The coastal road narrowed as it wound around cliffs and ravines, forcing the riders to form a single-file line. Steele checked his side mirror constantly, making sure no one fell behind. 3 hours into the ride from Half Moon Bay, with Santa Cruz still 20 miles ahead, he heard it, a sputtering cough from a motorcycle engine that didn't sound right. He raised his hand, the signal to pull over, and the line of bikers began to slow. They found a turnout overlooking the ocean, though the view was nothing but gray sheets of rain. Wildman's bike was the source of the noise, its engine making a concerning knocking sound. "Water in the fuel line, maybe," Doc suggested, crouching down to examine the motorcycle as rain ran in rivulets off his leather jacket. Or could be something worse. Before they could diagnose the problem properly, another bike began to sputter. Ronnie Pinball Jackson's old Harley, which had seen better days even before being subjected to miles of driving rain. "Just perfect," Pinball muttered, wiping water from his face. At 62, he was one of the older members, and his wrinkled face looked even more lined with worry. Steele checked his phone. "No signal, of course. Support vehicles?" he asked. Doc shook his head. "About 15 minutes behind us. Got stuck at that flooded section we passed." As if on cue, a third bike, tanks this time, began making an ominous grinding noise when he tried to restart it. "We need to find shelter and sort this out," Steele decided. He studied the soggy map that Wildman pulled from his saddlebag. "There's a town a few miles inland, Riverdale. We can head there, find a garage, wait for the support team to catch up." No one argued. With 3 bikes now being pushed rather than ridden, they had little choice. The town of Riverdale appeared after a miserable 30-minute trek down a turning country road. It was the kind of small community that seemed frozen in time, a main street with old-fashioned storefronts, a single traffic light, and American flags hanging from nearly every porch despite the weather. As the bedraggled procession of Hells Angels entered the town, people stopped to stare. Shopkeepers came to their doorways. A mother hurried her children inside a diner. The sudden attention made Steele uneasy. He'd seen that kind of reaction before, and it rarely ended well. "Let's find a garage," he instructed, keeping his voice low. "Quick in and out. No trouble." They spotted an auto repair shop at the far end of the main street. Its large garage doors were closed against the weather, but a light shone from the office window. Steele, Wildman, and the owners of the disabled bikes approached while the rest of the group waited by their motorcycles, acutely aware of the growing number of spectators watching from under-store awnings and umbrellas. The mechanic, a bald man in his 50s with grease-stained coveralls, took one look at them through the window and shook his head. He cracked the door open but didn't invite them inside. "We're closed," he said flatly. "We've got 3 bikes down," Steele explained, trying to keep his voice friendly despite the cold rain running down his back. Just need a place to work on them out of the rain. Happy to pay for the space. The mechanic's expression didn't change. Like I said, we're closed. Owner's orders. Listen, buddy. Wildman started, his patience wearing thin, but Steele put a hand on his arm. We're doing a charity run, Steele tried again, gesturing to the donation boxes still attached to their motorcycles. For the Children's Hospital in Oakland. Just need an hour to fix our bikes and we'll be on our way. The mechanic's eyes narrowed. Hell's Angels, right? He didn't wait for confirmation. Yeah, we know all about you. Boss says we don't service your kind. Before Steele could respond, a police cruiser pulled up, its lights flashing. 2 officers stepped out, hands resting casually near their holsters. Is there a problem here? Asked the older officer, who had the weathered look of a small-town sheriff who'd seen it all. No problem, Steele replied, raising his hand slightly to show he meant no trouble. Just looking for a place to fix our bikes so we can get back on the road. You're a long way from Oakland, the sheriff observed, his eyes taking in the Hell's Angels patches on their vests. We're on a charity ride, Doc explained, stepping forward and pulling out a flyer from inside his jacket. It was damp but still legible. For the Children's Cancer Ward. 3 of our bikes broke down. The sheriff glanced at the flyer without taking it. By now, a small crowd had gathered despite the rain, watching the confrontation unfold. Last time your club came through a town in this county, the sheriff said, there was a bar fight that put 3 locals in the hospital. That was before my time, but folks around here have long memories. Steele felt a knot of frustration forming in his gut. That was 15 years ago. Different chapter, different time. We're just trying to raise money for sick kids. Right. The sheriff's tone made it clear he didn't believe a word. Well, there's no law against standing in the rain, but I'm going to have to ask you all to move those bikes. He pointed to where the rest of the Angels waited. They're blocking a fire. Lane. It was a transparent excuse, there was plenty of room on the wide main street, but Steele knew better than to argue with small-town law enforcement. Looking for a reason, fine, we'll move them. As they walked back to the group, Wildman muttered under his breath, This is not now, Steele cut him off. Let's just regroup and figure something out. When they returned to their waiting brothers, the situation had deteriorated further. A group of local men had approached the waiting Angels, and from the body language, the conversation wasn't friendly. Don't care what you claim you're doing, a large man in a flannel shirt was saying as Steele approached. We know trouble when we see it. Tank, never known for his diplomacy, was squaring up to the man. Back off, buddy. We're not here for you. Steele quickly inserted himself between them. Let's all take a breath here. We're just passing through trying to raise money for sick kids. Yeah, right, scoffed another local. This one younger with a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. Probably just a cover for running drugs. The accusation sparked angry mutters from the Angels. 15 years of trying to clean up their image. And still this was how people saw them. Check the donation boxes if you don't believe us, Steele challenged, pointing to the nearest motorcycle. That was a mistake. The young local took it as an invitation, approaching one of the bikes and roughly grabbing the donation box attached to the back. Hey, shouted Pinball, moving to stop him. Careful with that. In the confusion that followed, Pinball lunging forward, the local yanking at the box, the sheriff shouting orders, the inevitable happened. The donation box, softened by hours of rain, tore open. Bills and coins spilled across the wet pavement, instantly soaked by puddles and trampled underfoot as people moved. No. Steele lunged forward, dropping to his knees to gather the scattered money. Other Angels did the same, desperately trying to save the donations they'd collected. The sheriff's voice cut through the chaos. That's enough. Everyone freeze! Steele looked up from the ground, rain and frustration stinging his eyes. The money they'd carefully collected over miles of dangerous riding was ruined, scattered, or lost in storm drains. The locals were watching with a mixture of suspicion and, from some, what looked like regret. All of you, the sheriff addressed the Hell's Angels. I want you out of this town now. Our bikes are broken, Steele reminded him. Still kneeling on the ground, a handful of soggy bills clutched in his fist. We can't leave. Not my problem, the sheriff replied coldly. Push them if you have to, but I want you gone in 30 minutes or I start impounding vehicles. Steele slowly got to his feet. Around him, his brothers looked as defeated as he felt. Hours of riding through storm. All the planning, the promises to the kids at the hospital. all of it falling apart in this unwelcoming town. What about our support vehicles? Doc asked quietly. They'll be looking for us. I'll try to get a signal up on that hill, Wildman suggested, pointing to a rise at the edge of town. Let them know where we are. The sheriff folded his arms. Clock's ticking, gentlemen. As the Angels regrouped, trying to gather what remained of their donations and figure out their next move, Steele noticed something. An elderly man stood at the edge of the crowd, leaning on a walking cane, watching the scene with intensity. Unlike the others, he wasn't glaring or shouting. He was simply observing, his eyes moving from the scattered money to the donation boxes to the Hells Angels patches. Steele turned away, focusing on the immediate problem. They needed shelter, tools, and time, none of which this town seemed willing to provide. The charity run, which had started with such hope that morning, now seemed doomed to failure. What's the plan, boss? Tank asked, his earlier bravado replaced by genuine concern. Steele looked at his watch. It was only 2 p.m., but the dark storm clouds made it feel like evening was already setting in. He thought of Lily and the other kids waiting at the hospital, of the paper angels tucked inside their jackets, now as soggy and beaten as their spirits. I don't know, he admitted, but we're not giving up. What he didn't know was that the old man with the cane was already making his way toward them, moving with purpose despite his evident age, about to change everything. The old man moved through the crowd with surprising authority, his walking cane tapping a steady rhythm against the wet pavement. Despite his age, he had to be pushing 80. People stepped aside for him without question. There was something in his bearing, a quiet dignity that commanded respect. Steele watched the man's approach with wary curiosity. In his experience, the elderly were often the most set in their views, the quickest to judge. Yet this man's expression held none of the fear or disgust he'd seen on the other townspeople's faces. Sheriff Wilson, the old man called out, his voice stronger than his frail appearance suggested. What exactly is going on here? The sheriff turned, and Steele noted how his stance immediately softened. Dr. Jenkins, you should be home in this weather, not out here catching pneumonia. Dr. Jenkins, so he was a local physician. That explained some of the respect he was being shown. I'm plenty capable of deciding when to stay inside, Tom. The old doctor waved off the concern. Now, would you mind explaining why you're running these folks out of town when they clearly need help? The sheriff's jaw tightened. These men are Hell's Angels, Doc. You know what that means. I can read their jackets just fine, Dr. Jenkins replied dryly. What I'm asking is why that matters more than common decency. He gestured toward the scattered, sodden bills that the bikers were still trying to collect. And why perfectly good donation money is being washed down our storm drains. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some looked uncomfortable now, shifting their weight from foot to foot. Donations for what? Someone called out. Dr. Jenkins turned to Steele, raising an eyebrow in question. Steele straightened up, rainwater dripping from his beard. Oakland Children's Hospital. Pediatric Cancer Ward. The doctor's eyes widened slightly, a flash of something, recognition maybe, crossing his weathered face. Is that so? He studied Steele for a long moment. And how did you come to choose that particular cause? There was no judgment in the question, only genuine curiosity. Steele found himself answering honestly. My niece. She's 8, fighting leukemia for the second time. He pulled out the paper angel from inside his jacket. Now a soggy mess, but still recognizable. The kids made these for us. Dr. Jenkins took the paper angel with careful hands, examining it as if it were a precious artifact. Then he turned to address the crowd, his voice projecting with the practiced ease of someone used to being listened to. 43 years, he announced. That's how long I served as head of pediatric medicine at Oakland Children's Hospital before I retired to Riverdale. 43 years of watching children fight battles that would bring grown men to their knees. The revelation sent a ripple through both the townspeople and the bikers. Steele exchanged a glance with Wildman, whose eyebrows had shot up in surprise. That hospital, Dr. Jenkins continued, saved my grandson's life when he was diagnosed with neuroblastoma at age 4. The same hospital these men are raising money for while we stand here in the rain questioning their motives. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. Doc, you don't understand. These men, Dr. Jenkins cut him off, are soaking wet, have broken motorcycles, and are trying to help children with cancer. What exactly am I missing, Tom? When no one answered, the doctor turned back to Steele. "You need a place to fix your bikes?" Steele nodded, still processing this unexpected turn of events. "Well then," Dr. Jenkins said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world, "you'll come to my place. I've got a barn with plenty of space and it's dry." "Doc," the sheriff started to protest, but the old man fixed him with a stare that silenced him mid-sentence. "Tom Wilson, I delivered you and patched you up more times than I can count. If you have a legitimate reason to arrest these men, do it now. Otherwise, I'm inviting them to my property as my guests, and that's the end of it." The silence that followed was broken only by the steady drumming of rain. Finally, the sheriff sighed. "Fine. But any trouble?" "There won't be," Steele assured him quickly, before turning to Dr. Jenkins. "Thank you, sir. We appreciate it more than you know." The old doctor gave a small, tired smile. Walter Jenkins. "And it's the least I can do. Now gather your people and follow me. It's not far." 20 minutes later, the entire group of Hell's Angels had relocated to Dr. Jenkins' property on the outskirts of town. It was an old farmhouse with several outbuildings, including a large barn that had been converted into a workshop space. As promised, it was dry, well lit, and most importantly, equipped with an impressive collection of tools. "My late wife used to say I needed a hobby after retirement," Dr. Jenkins explained as he showed them around. "Restoring old cars became my passion. Never thought I'd be hosting a motorcycle repair party, but life is full of surprises." The Angels wasted no time getting to work on the damaged bikes. Those with mechanical knowledge led the efforts while others helped as they could, or focused on drying out and reorganizing their gear. The support vehicles had finally caught up with them, bringing spare parts, food, and dry clothes. Steele found Dr. Jenkins, Walter, sitting on a workbench, watching the activity with evident interest. "Can I get you anything?" Steele asked, suddenly aware that they had taken over the man's space without much consideration for his comfort. Walter shook his head. "I'm fine. It's nice to have the place full of life again. Gets quiet out here, especially during storms." Steele nodded, understanding the loneliness that came with age. "Still, we can't thank you enough. Without you stepping in back there, people fear what they don't understand," Walter said simply. "This town isn't bad at heart, just suspicious of outsiders, especially ones with a reputation." "A reputation not all of us have earned," Steele pointed out, though there was no real anger in his voice anymore, just fatigue. "I know something about that," Walter replied. "When I first came to Riverdale after retirement, folks treated me like I was some big city doctor who couldn't possibly understand small town life. Took time to change their minds," he chuckled, "though I never had to deal with being mistaken for a drug runner." Steele laughed despite himself. "Yeah, well, the patches come with baggage. Tell me about your niece," Walter said, changing the subject. "The one at Oakland Children's." Something in the old doctor's tone, professional interest mixed with genuine compassion, made it easy for Steele to talk. He found himself telling Walter about Lily, about her diagnosis 2 years ago, the brief remission, and then the devastating return of the cancer. He talked about her purple headscarf and her love of unicorns, about how she never complained despite the pain and sickness. Walter listened intently, asking occasional questions that revealed his deep knowledge of pediatric oncology. When Steele finished, the old man was quiet for a moment. "You know," he finally said, "when I was at Oakland Children's, we lost too many kids to leukemia. The treatments were brutal, and the success rates weren't what they are now. Every advance in treatment came from research, and research came from funding." He looked around at the Angels working on the bikes. "What you're doing matters. Not just for your niece, but for all the children who will come after her." Steele had to look away, suddenly fighting a tightness in his throat. "That's the hope." A commotion from the corner of the barn drew their attention. Wild Man was starting his bike, the engine catching with a healthy roar. Cheers went up from the group. "1 down, 2 to go," Steele said with relief. As the afternoon wore on, the atmosphere in the barn transformed. The initial tension gave way to focused work, then to something almost like camaraderie. Walter moved among the bikers, sharing stories of his time at the hospital, asking questions about their charity run, offering tools from his collection when needed. Word seemed to have spread through town about the true nature of the Hells Angels' visit. Around dinner time, a truck pulled up outside the barn. Steele tensed until he saw Walter's pleased expression. "Ah," the old doctor said, "I was wondering when they'd show up." The truck's doors opened, and out stepped the owner of the local diner, carrying large containers of food. Behind him, several other townspeople emerged, some bringing more food, others with tools or motorcycle parts. Dr. Jenkins called and explained what you folks are doing, the diner owner said gruffly to Steele. My brother's kid was treated at Oakland Children's last year. Good hospital. Figured you all might be hungry. It was a peace offering. Not quite an apology, but close enough. By nightfall, all 3 bikes had been repaired, the donations dried out and reorganized, and new bonds formed between the most unlikely of allies. The rain had finally stopped, and the weather report promised clearer skies for tomorrow. As most of the angels prepared to sleep in the barn, Steele found Walter sitting on his porch looking out at the stars now visible between patches of clouds. We'll head out at first light, Steele told him. Try to make up for lost time. Walter nodded thoughtfully. The road to Santa Cruz will be clear by then. He was quiet for a moment, then added, You know, I haven't been back to Oakland Children's since I retired. 5 years now. Steele waited, sensing there was more coming. I think, Walter said slowly, it might be time for a visit. If you wouldn't mind company for the rest of your charity run. Steele blinked in surprise. You want to come with us? The old doctor smiled. Not on a motorcycle, mind you. I may be bold, but I'm not foolish. But I could follow in my car. Perhaps help explain your cause in the next town just in case you run into more skeptics. Steele extended his hand. We'd be honored, Doc. As they shook hands, Steele felt something he hadn't expected to find in this small, initially hostile town. A genuine ally. Someone who understood their mission not just in words but in his heart. Someone who had spent his life fighting the same battle they were now joining, the battle for children like Lily. For the first time since the storm hit, Steele felt certain they would complete their journey. And perhaps accomplish even more than they had originally planned. Dawn broke clear and golden over Riverdale, the storm clouds of yesterday retreating to the horizon like a bad memory. The air smelled fresh and clean, the kind of morning that promised better things ahead. Steele woke before most of his brothers, stepping outside the barn to breathe in the new day. The farmyard was quiet except for the occasional rooster crow from a neighboring property. He stretched, working out the kinks that came from sleeping on a barn floor, and noticed Walter already up and about, moving carefully but purposefully as he loaded a small suitcase into the trunk of his car. Morning, Steele called out. You're serious about coming with us then? Walter looked up and smiled, his face creased by decades of weather and laughter. I don't make offers I don't intend to keep. He closed the trunk with a solid thump. Besides, I've been thinking, a man shouldn't wait for a good reason to revisit the place where he spent the best years of his life. By 7:30, the entire group was awake, bikes checked and ready to roll. To their surprise, a small gathering of townspeople had assembled at the edge of Walter's property. Not a hostile crowd like yesterday, but folks with coffee thermoses and paper bags containing breakfast sandwiches. Thought you might want something for the road, explained the diner owner, looking slightly embarrassed about their previous reception. And we took up a collection. He handed Steele an envelope. For the kids. Steele opened it to find nearly $800 in cash. He looked up, genuinely moved. This is... Thank you. The mechanic who had turned them away yesterday stepped forward. Heard your bikes are running okay now, but if you need a professional once-over before you hit the road... We're good, Wildman assured him. But without the edge his voice might have held a day earlier. Thanks, though. As they prepared to depart, Steele noticed Walter speaking with the sheriff by his patrol car. The conversation looked serious but not tense. When Walter returned, he had a satisfied expression. Sheriff Wilson will be providing us with an escort to the county line, he announced. To ensure we don't encounter any more misunderstandings. Steele raised an eyebrow. You've got some pull around here, Doc. Walter shrugged modestly. When you've delivered half the town's babies and set their broken bones for 4 decades, people tend to listen. He glanced back at the sheriff. Tom's a good man at heart, just protective of his town, reminded him that sometimes protection means opening doors, not closing them. The procession that left Riverdale was quite different from the bedraggled group that had entered it. 35 motorcycles in formation, support vehicles following, Walter's sedan with its retired physician license plate holder, and a police cruiser with lights flashing leading the way. People came out onto their porches to watch, some waving, others simply observing with newfound curiosity. As they reached the edge of town, Steele couldn't help but reflect on how quickly things had changed. One man with the right words at the right time had transformed hostility into hospitality. It was a lesson he wouldn't soon forget. The road to Santa Cruz was indeed clear, just as Walter had predicted. They made good time. The dry pavement and sunshine a welcome change from yesterday's treacherous conditions. At each planned stop, Walter would arrive ahead of them, introducing himself to local officials or business owners, explaining the charity run and paving the way for the Angels' arrival. Word began to spread along their route. In Santa Cruz, a local radio station sent a reporter to interview them. Steele, still uncomfortable with media attention, was about to give his standard cautious responses when Walter stepped in. "These men," the doctor told the reporter with conviction, "are doing something extraordinary. They're breaking stereotypes and raising money for children who need specialized care that many families simply can't afford. I worked at Oakland Children's Hospital for over 40 years, and I can tell you that every dollar they raise will directly impact a child's life." The interview was broadcast live, and by the time they reached their next stop in Monterey, a crowd was waiting. People pressed forward not with suspicion, but with donations and questions about how they could help. A woman approached Steele as he was securing the increasingly full donation boxes. "My daughter was treated at Oakland Children's 3 years ago," she said quietly. "Bone cancer. She's in remission now." She handed him a $50 bill. "This isn't much, but it's more than enough," Steele assured her. "Every bit helps." As the day progressed, their ride took on an almost celebratory atmosphere. In each town, Walter's presence and endorsement opened doors. His medical background gave legitimacy to their cause, while his age and dignity provided a stark and effective contrast to the rough-looking bikers. Together, they made an unexpected but compelling team. By mid-afternoon, they had more than made up for the time lost during yesterday's storm. Steele consulted with Walter and made a decision. "We're ahead of schedule," he announced to the group during a rest stop. "I say we push on, make it back to Oakland tonight instead of tomorrow. The kids are expecting us." The suggestion was met with unanimous approval. Despite the long hours on the road, no one wanted to delay their arrival at the hospital. They had promises to keep. As they approached Oakland, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Steele felt a growing sense of anticipation, mixed with pride in what they had accomplished despite the obstacles. He checked his phone and saw a text from Rita, the oncology nurse. "Kids are waiting. Lily's excited, hurry!" The hospital had arranged for them to use the main parking lot for their arrival. As they turned the final corner, Steele was stunned by what he saw. A crowd of at least 100 people had gathered. Hospital staff in scrubs and lab coats, parents, community members, and news cameras. A large banner stretched across the hospital entrance. "Thank you, Hell's Angels." And in the front, seated in wheelchairs and on benki, these were the children from the oncology ward, many wearing paper angel wings made from the same materials as the ones the bikers had carried. Steele spotted Lily immediately, her purple headscarf replaced by a purple helmet, a miniature version of his own. The Angels parked their bikes in formation, engines falling silent after hundreds of miles of roaring life. In that moment of quiet, a small, clear voice called out, "Uncle Mike." Steele turned to see Lily waving frantically. Without caring who was watching, he rushed to her, dropping to his knees to embrace her carefully, mindful of the IV still attached to her arm. "You made it," she exclaimed. "And you brought so many angels." "I promised, didn't I?" he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Never break a promise to you, Lily Pad." As the other angels dismounted, many were similarly greeted by children they'd never met, but who treated them like returning heroes. Wildman found himself gifted with a drawing of a motorcycle with wings. Doc was surrounded by curious kids asking if his road name meant he was really a doctor. Even Tank, the toughest of them all, was kneeling to sign a little boy's cast. Walter stood back, watching it all with a gentle smile until a white-haired doctor in a lab coat approached him with wide eyes. "Dr. Jenkins? Is that really you?" "Dr. Chen," Walter greeted his former colleague warmly. "Still keeping these halls in order, I see. Trying my best." Dr. Chen glanced at the Hell's Angels. "When I heard you were coming with them, I could scarcely believe it." "You hate motorcycles," Walter chuckled. "I still do. but I've developed a certain appreciation for the men who ride them. The formal check presentation was a blur of cameras, applause, and speeches. Steele, uncomfortable in the spotlight, kept his words brief, thanking everyone who had helped along the way. The final total raised, including the hospital's matching funds and last-minute donations, was over $70,000. This money, Dr. Chen announced, will fund a new pediatric cancer research initiative and help families with treatment costs. He turned to the assembled angels. You've changed lives today, gentlemen, not just through your donation, but by showing these children that sometimes help comes from unexpected places. As the formal event concluded and people began to disperse, Steele found himself standing with Walter near the motorcycles. What now? The old doctor asked. Back to being regular Hell's Angels? Steele watched as his brothers interacted with the hospital staff and children, seeing them in a new light himself. I don't think we can go back to regular anything after this. Things change you, you know? Walter nodded sagely. Indeed they do. The chapter's already talking about making this an annual event, Steele continued. Bigger next year. Maybe involve other chapters. Count me in, Walter said without hesitation. Though next time perhaps we could avoid the storm. Steele laughed. No promises there. But we'll definitely take the scenic route through Riverdale. As evening settled over the hospital, most of the angels prepared to head back to their clubhouse. Steele, however, had one more stop to make. He found Lily back in her room, tired but happy, the purple helmet still firmly on her head. Best day ever, she declared as he sat beside her bed. You're like officially my hero now. Nah, Steele shook his head. You're still the toughest person I know, Lilypad. Are you really going to do it again next year? She asked sleepily. Steele thought about the journey, the storm, the breakdowns, the confrontation in Riverdale, and the unexpected friendship with Walter. He thought about the barriers broken and the stereotypes challenged. Most of all, he thought about the faces of the children today, seeing the Hell's Angels not as something to fear but as something to celebrate. Yeah, he said, squeezing her small hand gently. Some rides are worth repeating. As he left the hospital that night, he found Walter waiting by his car, gazing up at the building where he had spent his career. She's going to be okay, the old doctor said, not as a question but as a statement of faith. Steele nodded, wanting to believe it with all his heart. She's strong. So is her uncle, Walter observed. And now she has an entire motorcycle club in a town that previously feared them on her side. He smiled. Sometimes strength comes from the most unexpected sources. Steele couldn't have put it better himself. As he mounted his bike for the short ride back to the clubhouse, he felt different. They all did. They were still Hell's Angels, still rough around the edges, still misunderstood by most of society. But now they were something else too. They were angels in the truest sense of the word, messengers of hope, unexpected guardians, proof that sometimes redemption comes not from changing who you are, but from finding the best way to be exactly that.